Okay, so hi, we'll talk about Cerebellum, which is mózg in Polish, and specifically, it's interesting because we somewhat understand the mechanism by which the cerebellum learns. And okay, this is the cerebellum, this part right here, and on the right is a pretty cerebellum. Uh, it's about 10% of the brain's volume, but it contains many neurons, about half of all the neurons. And it's part of the heat brain. And this is another picture. This is another fMRI scan of the cerebellum with these pretty tree-like patterns. Uh, and we see them because cerebellum is made out of layers. Um, but first, like high-level view, what's its function? So the cerebellum, it receives the sensory information uh, from the periphery and from the cortex, and it also receives the movement commands. So some part of the brain that steers movement commands some movement. It's sent to some other part that implements it, and the copy to the cerebellum as well. And the cerebellum outputs via. So when I say cerebellum, I usually mean cerebral cortex, which is this part made out of parallel layers with these tree-like patterns. And the cortex outputs to the deep cerebral nuclei, which is a nuclei inside the cerebellum, or inside the cerebral cortex, whatever. And this deep cerebral nuclei then further outputs to the thalamus, and from the thalamus, this information is dispersed throughout the whole cortex. And how is this output of the cerebellum used? Okay, so it receives all this sensory information and movement commands. So it maintains some model of what is our body state, right? Which muscles are contracted, which are not. What is the sensory information from the skin? Do we feel any pain? And also, so what is the state of the body now, but also what it should be, because this is the movement that our body now wants to perform. So it can anticipate the changes that happen because of the movement and signal that. And the output of the cerebellum, it is there's no single thing that this output of the cerebellum is used for. We should more think like it is outputted throughout the cortex, and in various regions of the brain it has different functions. So something we know is that the function of the cerebellum is localized. So there's parts of the cerebellum that are involved in language, speech, some other that's involved in movement of this finger, of that finger, and so the neurons in these parts are the output that comes directly from these neurons is just somewhere in the brain that processes, say, these finger movements, but it's used differently in different parts of the brain. The use for this output in all these parts of the brain, intuitively something like the cerebellum outputs an intensity and sort of a regulating signal. But this is very vague now, and we will talk in precisely about what I mean. All right, but this is the higher level description, and we know about that um, by, as usual, by case studies of people with lesions of cerebellum. So there's these people, and as I said, that function is localized, so different lesions will lead to different results. But the people with lesion of cerebellum have problems with, say, maintaining balance, with movements. The movements of such a person is sort of weird. So let's take an example of just moving a hand towards some location or maybe grabbing an object. A person with cerebral damage can still perform this movement, but it will be more like that we aim our hand and we don't hit the target. So we see that, we should move our hand more to the right, and we try again and we move to the right, and so on. And eventually we hit this object, we hit the target. But with Cerebellum, it's working, and usually it's different, right? We can fine tune the movement so that it's precise and aims exactly where we want to. So the intuition that we can get from these studies is that the output of the cerebellum regulates the precise timing and control of various muscle movements, so that the movement is smooth and that we, throughout the movement, we can correct for the movement. And this is possible again because the cerebellum receives both the sensory information and the copy of the movement command. Okay, so movement balance, these are easy to observe, but also there's some scattered evidence for involvement of cerebellum in cognitive tasks as well, and certainly in language, but not only in speaking, because this is moving your body, but also in processing speech, language. Okay, so this is the same picture again, but now we can see in detail why we see this pattern of parallel layers, because here is zoomed in pictures of one of these layers. And okay, let's look at this. So we have this blue region, which is made mostly out of granular cells. Then there is this big red-orange cells, which are called Purkinje cells, and then the yellow region is made mostly out of dendrites of the Purkinje cells. In bigger detail, you can see this on this picture. Let's first just not focus on the details of the picture, but let's know that indeed we have these granular cells, these small cells right here, in this blue inner layer, which project their axons in the form of these long parallel fibers to this outer yellow layer, in which these axons connect to the Purkinje cells dendrites. And Purkinje cells are these big red cells here. But there's also other cells, like these Golgi cells, basket striate cells, and then, okay, the cells in this nuclei inside the deep cerebral neurons. This is an attempt to simplify this diagram of exactly what happens. So here how this corresponds is the cerebral cortex here would be this, right? So these granular cells, Purkinje cells, all of that. The cerebral nuclei are these deep cerebral neurons. And then we get these two types of inputs that are coming into the cerebellum. So mossy fibers, these are sensory inputs from the periphery of our nervous system, and motor commands. So in these mossy fibers, the information is about the state of our body and what our bodies will be doing in the next coming seconds. In climbing fibers, this is as well sensory information from the periphery and from the cortex, but the type of this information and the way it's used in the cerebellum is completely different. This is an information about events happening. uh, and the cerebellum will need this information to be able to learn to correct uh, where the event signalizes some error that needs to be corrected for. So climbing fiber information coming with the climbing fiber would be something like we felt pain somewhere, or we are doing this hand movement and we overshoot. We need to correct for that, or we are throwing darts and the dart didn't hit, something like that. And then so what outputs from the cerebellum is the cerebral cortex outputs indirectly through the cerebral nuclei. The nuclei outputs then, as I've said, through the thalamus, and then to the rest of the cortex. The thing is that the intensity of this output from the deep cerebral nuclei is modulated by the output from the cerebral cortex. As we see, both receive the same inputs from mossy fibers and climbing fibers, but there is this layering happening in the cerebral cortex of the intensity of the signal on the cerebral nuclei that in turn modulates the output from the cerebral nuclei. And also, thing that's not visible on the diagram, but is the case, is that neurons in the cerebellum are parts of loops that form throughout the whole brain. So there's this input from the cortex via climbing fiber that connects to the cerebral cortex, cerebral nuclei, out through the thalamus and somewhere in the cortex, and these things actually form loops. And we know that by studies using virus tracing, where there is viruses that you can put into a neuron, and then the virus flows either with the direction of axons or the other direction. And we can trace this way the connections between neurons, and we've traced that in fact neurons in the cerebellum form loops that that go via all these other parts of the brain. It's not like a one big loop. It's more like few of these neurons right here from this loop, and there's plenty of loops formed going through different parts of the cerebellum. And again, this function of the cerebellum is localized. So now, with this information, let's go back to this diagram that's more exact. So the input from the mossy fiber, again, this is the sensory information from the periphery. It connects to granular cells. Each granular cell receives maybe like 5 of these inputs. And then it projects further via this long parallel axon to Purkinje cells. So it connects to plenty of Purkinje cells. And this one, such Purkinje cell with this huge tree-like dendrite structure, it can form even as many as 1 million synaptic connections with parallel fibers. So Purkinje cell has quite a comprehensive idea of our body state, right? It receives many inputs. The Golgi cells, basket cells, we don't know that much about what they do. So in this picture, we are ignoring these. And then the climbing fiber, the second type of sensory information. So it looks different, right? It creates this, it twists like a vine around the dendrites of the Purkinje cell. So it connects many synaptic connections with a single Purkinje cell, and one climbing fiber connects maybe up to like few different Purkinje cells. Also, these deep cerebral neurons, they also get the input from the glial cells, from the climbing fiber. And now, how this works is that the deep cerebral neurons, nothing happens. These neurons fire at some rate, just spontaneously throughout the lifetime of the brain. These neurons fire, but when a movement is performed, and I'm talking about movement because this is this case we understand somewhat well, and it's more intuitive. When a movement is performed which is modulated by this deep cerebral neuron, the neuron would fire at a higher intensity in some time that surrounds the movement, and the exact timing when this high intensity period happens and the intensity of it, this needs to be modulated by the Purkinje cell, which, as you can see on the diagram, it forms an inhibitory connection with the deep cerebral neuron, and via this connection it modulates the firing rate and the timing of this burst coming from the deep cerebral neuron. And then the learning happens in this way, that the parallel fibers, so indirectly the mossy fibers, the synaptic connections to Purkinje cells are somewhat low strength. I've said that there's up to 1,000,000 of these connections, right? So each single of these connections is not that strong, but together they signalize a specific state of the body, right? But when a climbing fiber fires, it certainly means that the Purkinje cell would also fire, and it fires in what's called a complex spike. So it's firing followed by a rapid burst of consecutive firings, and the result of this complex spike is such that the synaptic connections with Purkinje cells, between parallel fibers and Purkinje cells that were active when the complex spike happened, decrease in strength. What this means is that next time the specific sensory case happens, body enters the specific state with the specific motor command, again, the Purkinje cell would fire later because the strength of the synaptic connections was lowered. So in this way, the climbing fiber, which sends this error correcting signal, this information about some event that needs to be corrected for, in this way, the climbing fiber modulates the straight up, means that the Purkinje cell, next time this exact situation happens, will fire later, and this in turn modulates the firing rate of the deep cerebral neuron, and so on. So this is the main understand mechanism that happens here. And maybe you would question, okay, so if we can learn to decrease the strength of a synaptic connection, is that all we need? Like, how do we increase the strength of synaptic connection so that next time this specific sensory situation happens, the Purkinje cell fires quicker? And I don't have an answer to that. We don't have an answer for that in general. But bear in mind that we don't understand all the mechanisms happening here, right? Maybe some of these other cells present here have some regulatory role, some homeostatic role that balances the system. In general, we don't know the full picture, and there's also learning happening at many other synaptic connections here, not just the synapses with Purkinje cells. But this is the mechanism, and this is what I wanted to talk about. Yeah, here nothing new really, so other synapses learn as well. And also, it is believed that part of the processing happens already within the granule cells, mediated by the Golgi cells. Yeah, right. Like the granule cell already receives few of the synaptic connections from muscle fibers, so it can already learn to react only to some specific sensory condition, like both this muscle and this muscle is contracted. And there's also all these other cells which can mediate that. So yeah, just we don't understand it fully yet. And these are the sources. Thanks, and I hope that this time it recorded.